What if the secret to human development was hidden in a 1,400-year-old book? An atheist biologist who spent her life mocking religion discovered the truth, and it shattered her disbelief forever. Dr. Emily Carter, a renowned biologist and Nobel-winning researcher in embryology, had always believed science and religion could never mix. But what happened in her lab would prove her wrong in the most shocking way. Meet Dr. Emily Carter. A groundbreaking scientist in the field of embryology, she's not just known for her achievements, but for her ability to challenge conventional wisdom. Emily's expertise in human development through cutting-edge AI-driven research has brought her accolades and respect from the scientific community. She has dedicated her life to exploring the mysteries of human biology, gaining worldwide recognition for her contributions to the field. But despite her success, there was one thing she was absolutely certain of: science and religion could never coexist. As an ardent atheist, Emily had long rejected any form of spirituality or belief in the supernatural. She was deeply skeptical of any claims that religion could contribute anything of value to scientific discourse. For years, she had taught and mentored students, always emphasizing that science was the only reliable path to truth. She believed the world was governed solely by observable laws and natural forces, and she held firm to this belief despite growing pressure from society to acknowledge the role religion played in many lives. Emily was confident that her path, rational, logical, and scientific, was the only true one. But one fateful discovery would soon cause Emily to question everything she thought she knew about faith and the universe. It all started one afternoon during a routine meeting with her colleague, Dr. Robert Langley, a fellow researcher with a passion for genetics. As they went over the latest developments in their work on embryology, Robert casually mentioned something that would trigger a monumental shift in Emily's worldview. He remarked, "You know, I was reading some old texts, and I came across something that might interest you. Did you know the Quran describes the stages of embryology in a way that matches what you're studying?" At first, Emily laughed. She had always dismissed religious texts as mythological or irrelevant in a scientific context. To her, the Quran, like any other religious scripture, was not a source of knowledge but of faith. She had never once considered that it could contain anything of scientific value. "That's interesting," she said, almost mocking the idea. "But how could something written over 1,400 years ago contain real scientific facts about human development?" Her tone was light-hearted, dismissive even, but something in Robert's expression made her pause. He wasn't joking. Robert, an atheist like her, had actually read the Quran and found something compelling. His conviction, albeit brief, was enough to spark a curiosity in Emily, a curiosity she hadn't anticipated. For the first time, she felt the pull to look deeper. Could it be possible that there was something more to these ancient words than she had ever imagined? Something that had been hidden in plain sight for centuries. Dr. Carter couldn't shake the conversation she had with Robert. She knew that as a scientist, she needed to approach everything with logic and evidence. This idea was unlike anything she had ever considered. The Quran, a book that had always been dismissed as a spiritual text, was being linked to scientific facts she had spent years studying. That evening, in the privacy of her office, Emily opened her laptop and began researching the Quranic verses Robert had mentioned. She quickly found Surah 23:14, which describes the stages of embryonic development in striking detail. "Then we made the sperm into a clot of congealed blood. Then we made that clot into a lump of flesh." The moment she read the verse, a chill ran down her spine. The description of the human embryo as a clinging clot was a phrase she had heard countless times in her work. It was a scientific term, a description of the early stages of human development that she had studied through the microscope, time and time again. But could this ancient text really be describing the same process? Was it possible that a 7th-century book had such an accurate description of something that modern science had only recently understood? Her scientific mind raced with questions. She began cross-referencing the verse with her own research. The more she looked, the more it seemed like the Quran was describing the very same stages she had been observing in her lab. She felt both awe and disbelief. The idea that the Quran contained scientific knowledge, especially about human development, seemed impossible, but the evidence before her was undeniable. Could this be a mere coincidence? Or was it something far more profound? She knew one thing for sure: this was not just a passing curiosity. This was a challenge to everything she had ever believed. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of inner turmoil. Emily had always prided herself on her scientific rigor. Her life had been built on facts, evidence, and the undeniable truths of the natural world. But now, she was confronted with something that seemed to defy her understanding of reality. Was she betraying science by even considering the possibility that the Quran could be more than just a religious text? She found herself torn. On one hand, her training and everything she had learned told her that the Quran was just a collection of spiritual teachings and ancient wisdom, far removed from the modern world of science. On the other hand, her research was showing her something that could not be easily dismissed. Her hands trembled as she returned to the lab, looking at the same embryonic images she had seen 1,000 times. Could the Quran, written so many centuries ago, be right, or was she allowing her curiosity to cloud her judgment? As she stared at the microscope, Emily couldn't help but reflect on her past, how she had rejected religion at a young age, convinced that faith and science were incompatible. But now, everything was changing. The more she looked at the Quranic verses and the more she compared them to the data in her lab, the harder it became to dismiss. Could it be that science and faith were not separate, but intertwined in a way she had never imagined? Her skepticism was being replaced by doubt, and the conflict within her mind grew stronger. If she accepted that the Quran contained scientific truths, what did that mean for everything she had believed in? Was she ready to accept that a 1,400-year-old book had knowledge that modern science was just beginning to understand? The truth was more elusive than ever, and Emily knew she had to find answers, no matter where the search led her. Emily's curiosity continued to pull her deeper into the Quran, and with each verse she read, she felt more compelled to search for answers. The Quran, a text she had once considered irrelevant to her work, was now a source of revelation. As she scoured through the verses, Emily stumbled upon Surah 55:19-20, which reads, "He has let free the two seas meeting together. Between them is a barrier which they do not transgress." This verse, describing the meeting of two seas, immediately caught her attention. Emily had been studying the ocean's depths for years, especially the phenomena of currents and underwater barriers. Modern oceanography had only recently uncovered the concept of the salinity levels in different layers of the ocean, creating natural barriers between bodies of water that do not mix. How could this have been described in a text written centuries ago? She knew it was no coincidence. The more Emily read, the more she found descriptions that aligned with modern scientific discoveries, from the layers of the ocean to the structure of the earth and even the expansion of the universe. How was it possible that such ancient knowledge existed long before humanity had the technology to understand these phenomena? It was as if the Quran had predicted discoveries that were only revealed by scientists in the 20th and 21st centuries. Her mind was racing, torn between scientific reason and the profound implications of what she was uncovering. Could this be the work of a higher power, revealing truths to humankind long before the means to understand them existed? Was there a connection between the science she had studied and the spiritual guidance she had dismissed for so long? The more Emily explored, the more her doubts grew. The evidence was mounting, and her beliefs were beginning to crack. Emily's newfound discoveries did not go unnoticed. As she began to share her findings with colleagues, the reaction was swift and harsh. Her academic peers, especially those in her lab, were quick to dismiss the idea that the Quran could have any relevance to the scientific principles they had spent their careers studying. "You're abandoning science for superstition," one colleague, Dr. Martin Hayes, shouted during a particularly heated conversation. "How can you even entertain the idea that a religious text has any bearing on your research? You're a scientist. This isn't the Dark Ages." Emily, usually calm and collected, felt the weight of the criticism. Dr. Hayes' words cut deep. She had spent her entire career building a reputation based on hard science, on data, and evidence. To even suggest that the Quran could offer scientific truths felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked for. Yet, the evidence was undeniable, and she knew it. The pressure mounted as more colleagues began to voice their concerns. "You're turning your back on the scientific community," one said. "If you start promoting this, you'll lose your credibility. You'll be ostracized." But Emily couldn't ignore the growing conviction she felt. The more she reflected on her discoveries, the more she understood that what she was uncovering wasn't just about science, It was about something deeper, something that transcended the realm of research and entered the spiritual. She was torn. On one hand, there was her career, her reputation, and the acceptance of her peers. On the other hand, there was the undeniable truth she was beginning to accept. The Quran had contained scientific knowledge long before mankind could comprehend it. She could feel the tension building inside her. What would she choose? Was she willing to sacrifice everything she had worked for in order to embrace a truth that could change everything? The weight of everything Emily had been grappling with finally came to a head, one quiet evening in her lab. It was late, and the lab was empty save for the soft hum of the machines that had been her companions for years. She sat alone, staring at the Quran that had once been just a curiosity, something she never imagined would become so central to her life. Her hands trembled as she opened it once again, rereading the verses she had so diligently analyzed. As the hours passed, Emily felt the internal struggle intensify. The conflict between her scientific background and the emerging realization that the Quran might hold profound truths was suffocating. She could feel the tension in her chest, the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her mind had been fighting it, but her heart was telling her something different. In that moment of deep reflection, a sense of calm washed over her. She whispered the words that had been brewing within her for days, despite her resistance. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Wa ashhadu an Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as the profound truth she had resisted for so long settled within her. She had embraced Islam. The moment felt like a release, a weight lifting from her chest. It was as if the walls she had built over the years to protect her from the unknown had come crashing down. For the first time, she truly understood that science and faith were not opposing forces but complementary ones. The Quran was not just a book of religious guidance, it was a miraculous source of knowledge, far beyond her understanding. The transformation was complete. What had once been a conflict between her rational mind and her faith had become a harmonious alignment. She realized that embracing this truth didn't undermine her scientific work but elevated it. The Quran was in many ways the final piece of a puzzle she had been putting together her entire life. The consequences of Emily's decision were immediate and far-reaching. Word of her conversion spread like wildfire throughout the scientific community. She had always been a respected figure, well known for her groundbreaking research in embryology. But the moment she publicly acknowledged her newfound faith, everything changed. Her colleagues were quick to distance themselves. Many of them could not understand how someone who had spent her life advocating for scientific rigor could turn to religion. She was labeled a traitor, someone who had abandoned the principles of science in favor of superstition. The academic community she had worked so hard to become a part of turned its back on her. Emily lost her prestigious position at the university. Her reputation as a biologist, which she had built with years of dedication and hard work, was shattered. She faced ridicule, both in the professional world and the media. Interviews that once highlighted her scientific achievements were now focused on her conversion, often with a tone of disbelief. The backlash was fierce, and Emily was left feeling like an outcast. But in the midst of this storm, something unexpected happened. The story of her journey went viral. People from all walks of life, especially those who had struggled with reconciling their faith and science, found inspiration in her story. In just 48 hours, Emily had gained millions of followers, all eager to hear her perspective on the connection between science and Islam. Emily's inbox flooded with messages of support and admiration. The very people who had once criticized her were now asking for interviews, wanting to know more about her conversion and the scientific discoveries she had uncovered in the Quran. She was no longer just a scientist, she had become a symbol of change, a bridge between the world of science and faith. Despite the personal costs, Emily had found something far more valuable: faith, peace, and a newfound purpose. She had lost her job, but in exchange she had gained an audience, one that was eager to hear her message and to explore the deeper connection between science and spirituality. What started as a scientific investigation had led her to discover something far more profound than she could have ever imagined.